Get out of my cockpit." The words landed like a fist on a table. Loud, deliberate, designed to be heard by every soul in the room. The crew briefing room at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport sat under fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just below comfort. It was 5:47 in the morning. 11 crew members were seated or standing around a long rectangular table covered in route charts, weather printouts, and paper coffee cups. The room smelled like burnt coffee and early mornings, and the particular tension that fills a space when someone has just said something that cannot be unsaid. Captain Roy Dalton stood at the head of the table, 53 years old, broad shoulders, silver hair trimmed close, a jaw that looked like it had been cut from something harder than bone. He wore his uniform the way men wear uniforms when they believe the uniform is them, pressed precise, carrying its own authority. His arms were crossed. His eyes were fixed on the doorway, on the woman standing in it. She had stepped in at 5:46 1 minute before the briefing was scheduled to begin. First officer's epaulets on her shoulders. A worn brown leather notebook under her left arm. A black pen clipped to her breast pocket. Flat regulation shoes. No jewelry visible. She was tall, composed, dark-skinned, and she was looking at Roy Dalton with an expression that was not anger, and was not fear, and was not anything he had a name for yet. Roy said it again slower this time, in case anyone had missed the first. "I don't fly with your kind. 11 people in that room." Not one of them spoke. The silence that followed was its own kind of statement. 11 signatures on a document nobody wanted to sign out loud. The woman in the doorway did not move. Roy turned to the nearest manager on his phone list and dialed. He did not lower his voice. He did not step away from the table. He wanted every person in that room to hear him because this was a performance as much as a complaint, and performances require witnesses. "Get me someone else," he said into the phone. Anyone else. What Roy Dalton did not know, could not have known, was that in exactly 14 days the woman he had just ordered out of his cockpit would end his career permanently, ground his 2 closest allies, and rebuild every policy inside the airline. He believed he understood. He would lose everything in a conference room he had walked past 100 times without ever imagining it could be used against him. But first, she had a flight to work. Before we get into what happened next, and trust me, nobody in that room saw any of this coming, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments right now, and if this story already has you sitting up straighter, hit subscribe and leave a like. Now, let's go back to that briefing room. Her name was Simone Adeyemi. She was standing in that doorway the way certain people stand in doorways, not filling the space exactly, but occupying it completely. She had stepped into the room the moment Roy finished his phone call, and she had not flinched at a single syllable of what he said. Her expression had not shifted. Her posture had not changed. The only movement she made was to reach up with one hand and adjust the notebook under her arm, as if she were simply settling in for something that was going to take a while. She was 44 years old. You would not have guessed it from her face, which held the kind of stillness that takes years to build and cannot be faked. She had been flying since she was 19. She had served 8 years in the military, 2 deployments flying cargo logistics routes that other pilots described as brutal, and she had described when asked as educational. She had earned her commercial certifications the same year she left the service, and she had gone from regional co-pilot to chief pilot inside 4 years, which was a pace that earned admiration in the people willing to look and resentment in the people who were not. She had a black pen that cost more than most people's dinner. She had a leather notebook with the initials S.A. pressed in small gold letters on the front cover. She had eyes that had seen this scenario before. Simone walked into the briefing room. She did not hurry. She did not hesitate. She moved to the chair assigned to the co-pilot on the route manifest, 3rd seat from the left on the window side of the table, and she sat down. She placed the notebook on the table in front of her. She uncapped her pen. Roy stared at her from the head of the table. She opened the notebook to the first blank page. She wrote the date. She wrote the flight number. She wrote the time, 5:49 a.m. Below that one line, first contact, verbal removal attempt, public, 11 witnesses, 0 responses. Roy's jaw tightened. He had expected her to leave. That was how this was supposed to go. He made the demand management backed it up. She packed her bag and disappeared down the jet bridge and became someone else's inconvenience. The fact that she was now sitting down and writing something in a small leather notebook was not part of the script he had prepared. He recovered quickly. Roy Dalton had been recovering quickly for 21 years. He turned to the cabin crew and began the briefing, as if the chair at his co-pilot's position were empty. He addressed each crew member by name. He asked Elena Vasquez, the lead flight attendant, about the meal service timing. He reviewed the weather package. He discussed the Charlotte ground delay that operations had flagged. He went through every item on the briefing checklist, and when he reached the section about co-pilot assignments and responsibilities, he said, "We will sort out the flight deck situation before pushback." Nobody asked what that meant. Simone wrote pre-briefing. Co-pilot role referenced as unresolved. No crew objection. Elena Vasquez glanced at Simone from across the table. It was a quick look. The kind of look that a person trained in customer service learns to make brief enough to be deniable. Half curiosity, half something that hadn't yet decided what it was. Simone caught the look and gave the smallest possible nod. Not a request for help, not a plea, just acknowledgement, the quiet signal that passes between two people who have both understood something at the same moment. Roy finished the briefing. He stood up. He picked up his route charts and his coffee cup, and he walked to the door, and the crew filed after him, the way crews file after captains. By habit, by rank, by the gravitational pull of a man who has spent 2 decades making himself the center of the room. Simone was the last to stand. She capped her pen. She closed her notebook. She tucked it under her arm, and she followed. 11 people had walked into that briefing. Only one of them knew how the story ended. The cockpit of a Boeing 737 is 8 feet wide. That morning it felt like 4. Simone entered the right seat and settled in with the ease of someone returning to a place they have never actually left. She adjusted the rudder pedals. She set her seat height. She pulled on her headset and positioned the boom mic with the automatic precision of a person who has done this motion so many times, it has become the same as breathing. Then she placed both hands on her thighs and looked out through the windshield at the dark tarmac and the amber glow of the airport lights. And she was quiet for a moment, in the particular way that pilots are quiet before they begin. Not empty, but focused in the direction of what comes next. She ran her eyes across the instrument panel. Not checking, remembering. Her scan moved from left to right in a pattern that took years to build correctly and a lifetime to lose primary flight display. Navigation, display, engine instruments, fuel, quantity, hydraulic pressure, bleed air. 6 instruments in 4 seconds, the way a musician runs scales before a performance, not for the audience, for the hands. She opened her notebook on her knee and wrote the time, 5:58 a.m. Roy Dalton dropped into the left seat without a word. He pulled his headset on, cracked his knuckles, and reached for the pre-flight checklist with the confidence of a man who has not yet accepted that anything has changed. Simone had been born in Atlanta. Her father was a structural engineer from Accra, Ghana, who had come to Georgia on a scholarship and stayed for love. Her mother, a school teacher from a small town in Alabama named Ruth, who read aloud at the dinner table every night and believed that the most important thing a person could possess was the ability to sit still in the middle of chaos. Simone had inherited the stillness from her mother and the precision from her father and the stubbornness from both of them equally, which meant she had it in full measure. She had learned to fly at 19 in a single-engine Cessna at a small airfield outside Atlanta. She had gone on to the Tuskegee University aviation program, then the military, then 8 years of cargo logistics routes that took her to places that did not appear on most maps. She had returned to civilian aviation at 27 and had co-piloted for a regional carrier for 2 years before she did the thing that everyone around her said was too early, too risky, and too ambitious for someone without a financial safety net. She had started an airline, one leased Embraer regional jet, 2 pilots including herself, 3 flight attendants, a single route Atlanta to Savannah twice a day. She had run the operation out of a rented office the size of a large closet, and she had flown the morning shift herself and done the paperwork at night and eaten sandwiches at her desk and believed with the specific irrational certainty of someone who has no alternative that it would work. It had worked. 15 years later, Apex Sky Airlines had 34 aircraft, 6 hub cities, and 2,100 employees. Simone had transitioned out of active flying 7 years ago when the airline grew too large to run from a cockpit. But she had kept every certificate, every type rating, every medical renewal, every simulator check. She had kept them because she believed that the person running the airline should understand what it felt like to sit in the right seat and be invisible. 3 months ago, 4 anonymous complaints had arrived through Apex Sky's new internal reporting system. The complaints were specific. A senior captain on the Atlanta hub loop was creating an environment that made co-pilots who were women or people of color feel unwelcome, undermined, and unsafe. 3 of the complaints came from flight attendants. 1 came from a junior first officer who had transferred off the route within 6 weeks of being assigned to it. Simone had read all 4 reports in a single sitting. She had forwarded them to HR and legal and received back a recommendation for a standard investigation. Interviews, paperwork, a formal process that would take 3 to 4 months and give the captain in question ample time to prepare. She had read that recommendation twice and rejected it. She wanted to see it herself. She had spent 3 weeks building the cover. Real credentials. All of it genuine, all of it hers, just not the complete picture. She had canceled a board meeting. She had told her executive assistant Denise Cole to hold everything non-critical for 2 weeks. She had bought a used rolling carry-on at a thrift store in Buckhead because her usual luggage was monogrammed in gold. She had tucked her founder's pendant inside her collar. She had picked up a standard-issue Apex Sky lanyard and clipped it over the one thing she kept. The notebook, which had been with her since the airline had 1 plane, and the pen which had been a gift from her father the day the SEC filing went through and which she was not willing to put in a drawer for anyone. She was here because of a woman named Renata Okafor. She was here because of 4 complaints. She was here because the pipeline that brought good pilots into cockpits had too many Roy Daltons standing inside it, and she had decided to see one up close. In the galley behind the cockpit, Elena Vasquez was running her pre-service inventory, meal trays, beverage cart, safety, card count. She moved through the routine with the efficiency of 9 years in the air. As she worked, Simone passed through on her way forward after the walk-around. Elena noticed 2 things in the 3 seconds Simone was visible. First, the pen clipped to the breast pocket. Black, heavy, the kind of pen that belonged in a different zip code than a first officer's salary. Second, the way Simone moved through the aircraft. Not like someone mapping the galley layout for the first time. Like someone who already knew where every handle and latch was on a 737 had always known, and was simply moving through a familiar space on the way to something more important. Elena went back to her inventory, but she kept watching. The pre-flight checklist on a Boeing 737 is designed for 2 voices. The captain calls each item. The co-pilot confirms. That is the architecture of cockpit safety. Not 1 person checking themselves, but 2 people checking each other, building a wall of redundancy between the aircraft and the one small error that turns a routine flight into a last one. Roy Dalton flew the checklist like a solo performance. He called item 7, co-pilot's altimeter setting, and answered it himself. He moved to item 11 without pause. Item 14, the radio communications check that required Simone's verbal response. He read to himself, lips moving slightly, and moved on. 3 items, 3 silences where her voice should have been. Simone noted each one with the time. 0603. Pre-flight checklist, items 7-11-14. Co-pilot confirmation not requested. CRM, non-compliance. CRM stood for Crew Resource Management, the principle that the captain and co-pilot operate as a team cross-checking each other's work, neither one operating in a vacuum. It existed because history had shown with terrible clarity what happened when pilots stopped talking to each other. Roy Dalton knew this. He had passed CRM evaluations every year for 2 decades. He simply chose on this particular morning not to practice it. When the ground controller cleared them for taxi, Simone keyed her microphone. Atlanta Ground Apex Sky 4012 taxi to runway 27 right via Charlie Delta. Roy reached over without looking at her and switched the radio to his side. He transmitted the same call word for word as if hers had never happened. The ground controller paused, a small hesitation that only a pilot would notice, then acknowledged Roy's transmission. On the radio log, only Roy's call would appear. Simone wrote 0618, radio override during taxi, deliberate. She did not reach for the radio. She did not protest. She simply noted the time and moved to the next item on her mental checklist, which was to keep watching. The takeoff was clean. Roy's hands were good. Whatever he carried in his character had not reached his flying. The 737 lifted off runway 27 right into a Georgia morning that was just beginning to find its color. Amber light cutting through thin clouds, the city dropping away beneath them in the particular way that cities drop when you are leaving them at speed. At cruise altitude, Roy spoke to her for the first time since the briefing room. Coffee, black, no sugar. Simone looked at him. "You're closer to the galley," he said. He did not look up from the flight management system. Figured you could grab one on the way back. The request was not about coffee. It was about position. About making sure she understood the hierarchy he had constructed inside his head. A hierarchy that had nothing to do with their actual ranks and everything to do with the picture he had decided before she walked through the door that she fit into. Simone unclipped her harness. She walked to the galley. She brought back the coffee, black, no sugar, and set it in the cup holder without a word. She returned to her seat. She picked up her pen. Roy sipped the coffee. He did not say thank you. She wrote 0741, directed to retrieve coffee, returned to seat, no acknowledgement. The landing in Charlotte was Roy's. Smooth-centered, the kind of approach that looked effortless from the outside and told experienced eyes everything about a pilot's hands. He ran the shutdown checklist alone. He signed the maintenance log without letting Simone review it. At the gate, he briefed the next crew segment without referencing her name once. Elena Vasquez passed Simone in the jet bridge after the passengers had deplaned. She stopped. The food cart was in her hands, and she had approximately 40 seconds before she needed to be somewhere else, but she stopped. "Hey," she said, "you doing okay?" Simone looked at her. Something passed across her face. Not gratitude, not exhaustion. Something that lived in the space between patience and planning. "Yes," Simone said. "Thank you for asking." Elena nodded and moved on. But she thought about that answer for the rest of the day. Because yes, thank you for asking was not what you said when someone asked if you were okay and you actually were. It was what you said when you were deciding whether to tell the truth. Craig Mercer appeared on the second flight. He was listed on the manifest as a check airman, officially present to observe crew performance. But the way he moved through the crew room made his actual function clear. He went directly to Roy's side. He sat next to Roy at the briefing table. When Roy poured himself a coffee, Craig poured one too. He was Roy's mirror, his buffer, his audience of one. He never spoke to Simone. Not hello, not good morning, not a glance. He moved around her the way water moves around a stone, as if she were simply an obstacle in the landscape present but not worth addressing. The cruelty of being made invisible by two people simultaneously is different from the cruelty of one. One person's hostility can be a personality conflict. Two people's silence is a coordinated act. Simone noted it. She wrote Craig Mercer's name and employee ID in the notebook margin and underlined it once. The pre-departure briefing for the second flight happened without her. She arrived at the gate, holding room at 0734 to find the crew already seated. Charts already reviewed, weather already discussed. Roy looked up from his notes with the particular expression of a man performing surprise, not feeling it performing it. "Oh, didn't see your name on the early list. We moved ahead. You know how tight the turnaround is." 6 crew members were in the room. Not one of them said that Simone hadn't been notified. Not one of them said they had seen her name on the same manifest Roy was holding. They shifted in their chairs. They looked at their phones. They made themselves small in the space between what had just happened and what they would be willing to say about it. Silence. Simone was learning was not the absence of participation. It was its own form of it. She sat down. She wrote 0734. Pre-departure briefing conducted without Copilot notification. 6 witnesses, 0 corrections. In the galley doorway, Tomas Rivera had been watching. He was 29, the junior flight attendant on the route 3 years in the air. A quiet man who carried his phone in his left breast pocket out of habit. His jaw had tightened when Roy delivered the surprised act. He had looked at Simone, who was already writing in her notebook, already past the moment, already moving forward, and he had taken his phone out of his pocket. He did not press record. Not yet. But he held it in his hand for the rest of the briefing, and his thumb rested near the button. At cruise altitude on the Charlotte to Jacksonville leg, Roy spoke to Craig as if Simone were not sitting 4 feet away with her headset half off. "You know what it used to be?" Roy said. "You had to earn this seat. Thousands of hours. Military time. Not some—" He waved his hand in a vague direction that included somehow the right seat. "Fast-track program." Craig looked at the flight management system. "Standards," he said. "One word. The word of a man who understood that sometimes one word does the work of a paragraph." Roy nodded. "Give it 2 months. You will see." He said it loud enough. He said it at the exact volume that allowed him, if ever asked, to say he hadn't been speaking to her. Simone's headset was half off because she had been cross-checking the navigation display. She heard every syllable. She wrote nothing this time. Some things you carry without ink. Dave Pruitt joined the crew on day 3. He was 38 louder than Craig, more comfortable in his cruelty. He told jokes at the crew table that stopped the moment Simone came within earshot, then resumed in a register just low enough to deny. He had a way of addressing the room that drew an invisible boundary around her, speaking to every other crew member, orienting his body away, creating a geography of exclusion that had no edges and left no marks. The layover hotel in Jacksonville had a restaurant divided by a glass partition. Roy's table was on one side, Craig to his left, Dave to his right, 2 other crew members filling out the frame. Laughter, clinking glasses, Roy telling a story with his hands the way pilots tell stories when they have an audience, and the audience is the point. Simone sat at a table on the other side of the glass. Table for 1 by the window. Grilled chicken, sparkling water, flight manual open beside her plate. She read, she ate, she turned pages at regular intervals. Dave Pruitt glanced at her twice. The second time, he leaned toward Roy and said something that made both men at the table laugh. Simone did not look up. She turned another page. She ate her chicken at exactly the same pace she had begun with. The loneliness at her table was a meal she had ordered on purpose. Later in her hotel room, she called Denise. The room was dark except for the blue glow of her phone. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to 2 rings before Denise picked up. "I've seen enough to confirm the pattern," Simone said. "But I need 1 more week. It's not just him. It's the structure around him. If I pull out now, HR calls it a personality conflict and closes the file in 30 days. Denise's voice came back measured, professional, and quiet. "Understood, ma'am. The board meeting is on the 17th. Before or after?" "Ma'am." Not Simone. Not, "Hey." The specific register of someone who understood exactly who they were speaking to. After Simone said, "I want the full picture," she hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at nothing for a while. Through the window, the Jacksonville skyline held its lights against the dark. She thought about the 4 complaints filed by people who had trusted the reporting system. She thought about what it cost them to file those complaints, and what it had cost them that those complaints had not yet produced a result. Even people who chose the war get tired of it. The choosing doesn't make the tired go away. She set her phone on the nightstand. She opened her notebook. She read back through 3 days of entries, 12 documented incidents, 12 moments that each in isolation could be explained away. Together they described something that had no innocent explanation. She capped her pen, she turned off the light, she slept. Elena Vasquez had been flying for 9 years. She had learned to read cockpits the way certain people learn to read weather, not from instruments, but from the quality of the air between people. After 9 years in crew rooms and jet bridges and hotel lobbies in 12 cities, she could tell you whether a captain and co-pilot were in sync within 40 seconds of boarding without ever seeing the inside of the cockpit. She read it in how they walked through the gate area, whether they arrived together or separately, whether the co-pilot looked at the captain when speaking or at a point slightly past their shoulder. What she could not do yet was figure out Simone Adeyemi. It was a turnaround in Charlotte the 3rd leg of the 2nd day. The galley between the main cabin and the forward bulkhead was quiet. Elena was counting meal trays with a clipboard and a ballpoint pen when Simone came through on her way back from the forward lav. It was a 3-second window, maybe less. Simone's collar had shifted slightly, just enough to reveal the pendant she wore at the base of her throat. Gold. Distinctive. A shape Elena had seen before but couldn't immediately locate. Then she located it. She had seen that shape on the quarterly earnings announcement posted in the crew break room at the Atlanta hub. Not the standard Apex Sky employee logo, the blue and silver badge that appeared on scheduling notifications and flight ops memos. This was different, heavier. The kind of logo that appeared on investor letters and SEC documents. The kind that belonged to whoever was at the top. Elena told herself it was a coincidence. People wore jewelry that looked like things. She put down her clipboard and finished her tray count. But when she looked up, Simone had already passed through the forward door, and Elena's clipboard count was 2 trays off because she had lost her place. Flight 4078, Charlotte to Jacksonville. Tuesday afternoon, clear at departure, ugly within the hour. Convective turbulence over the Smoky Mountains, the kind that sends coffee cups sliding and makes experienced flyers grip their armrests with both hands. Elena was bracing herself against the galley wall, feet spread, one hand on the overhead cabinet latch when the aircraft dropped hard, and then caught itself. Not with the lurch and recover motion of a pilot fighting the airplane. With a smooth, deliberate correction that felt like someone had placed a very calm hand on the aircraft's shoulder and redirected it through conversation rather than force. She had felt enough turbulence recoveries to know the difference. This was not a fight. This was something else. When the seatbelt sign stayed on, but the worst of the chop had passed, Elena made her way forward. Through the cracked cockpit door, she could see both pilots. Roy's hands were on the yoke. Both of them white-knuckled, jaw-set, breathing visible in the rise and fall of his shoulders. The look of a man managing something at the edge of his capacity. Simone sat beside him with her hands resting on the center console, not gripping anything, not braced. Her posture was the same as it was at the briefing table, exactly as upright, exactly as still. She was talking to Atlanta Center on the radio in a voice that belonged in a surgical theater, not urgent, not casual, precisely authoritative the way a voice becomes when its owner has used it in situations where the wrong word costs something irreplaceable. The controller bumped their request to the front of the line without comment. Elena had listened to cockpit-to-controller exchanges for 9 years. Controllers didn't do that without a reason. Roy said nothing. For the first time in 2 days, he did not override Simone's radio call. He released the yoke slightly and flexed his fingers as if they hurt. Elena backed away from the cockpit door. She stood in the galley for a moment without moving. Then she went back to her passengers. 11:30 at night, Jacksonville Crew Hotel, 4th floor. Elena couldn't sleep. She went for the vending machine, something with sugar and carbonation, the standard remedy. The business center was next to the vending alcove, separated by a glass wall. Through the glass, she saw Simone. Simone was at the center desk laptop, open reading glasses on. Elena had never seen the reading glasses before. They were thin-framed, professional, the kind that cost money and were not decorative. The screen in front of her showed a dashboard that Elena had never seen in any Apex Sky crew system. It was not the scheduling portal, not the training module, not the operations hub. It had revenue graphs, quarterly projections, route profitability charts with color-coded margin lines, fleet utilization data, the kind of screen that belonged in a boardroom, not a hotel business center at 11:30. Simone looked up. Through the glass, their eyes met. Something shifted in Simone's expression. Fast, almost imperceptible. Not panic. Not guilt. The quick calculation of someone who has been seen and is deciding in real time how much that matters. Then she smiled. Warm, easy, the smile of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide. Can't sleep either. Elena, too much coffee. Story of our lives. Simone closed the laptop. Not fast. A smooth, natural movement, the kind that happened to put a screen away before anyone could study it further. Elena retrieved her soda from the machine. She said goodnight. She went back to her room. She sat on her bed with the can sweating in her hands and did not drink it. She was thinking about a gold pendant and a radio call that moved to the front of the line and a laptop screen full of numbers that did not belong to a first officer. The next morning, Tomas found Elena before the crew van arrived. He showed her his phone without saying anything first. It was the Apex Sky Internal News Archive, a section of the employee portal that posted company updates, route announcements, leadership communications. He had it open to a shareholders' meeting photo from 3 years ago. The image showed a row of executives at a long table, name placards in front of them, the kind of photograph that appears in annual reports and is looked at by almost nobody. Almost nobody. In the back row, partially obscured by a standing microphone, was a woman, tall, composed, dark-skinned hair pulled back. The photo was grainy and small, a background figure that no photographer had intended to be a subject. Thomas had zoomed in until the pixels dissolved. "That's her," he said quietly. "I think that's her." Elena didn't answer. She looked at the image until her eyes started making edges where the resolution wouldn't support them. She handed the phone back. The crew van pulled up. Simone climbed in last coffee and hand leather notebook under her arm. She sat next to Elena, close enough that Elena could smell her perfume, something warm and expensive, nothing that came off a duty-free carousel. She opened her notebook and wrote something with the black pen in a hand that moved with the easy confidence of someone who had been writing important things in small books for a very long time. "Morning," Simone said. "Morning," Elena said back. Her voice came out one register higher than she intended. Simone didn't notice or didn't show that she noticed, which Elena was beginning to understand might be the same thing. The following afternoon, during a ground hold at Charlotte, Elena went to the cockpit with a service question. She stayed 30 seconds longer than necessary. She watched Roy. He was comfortable, leaning back, one hand loose on the center console, telling her the delay was a TC, nothing to worry about, smooth air ahead. He called her Elena. He asked about the meal service count. He was in this moment every inch the friendly captain, warm, paternal, certain of himself and his place in the room. Then Simone came forward for a navigation systems check. Roy's entire atmosphere changed. The warmth left his face. His body turned back toward his instruments before Simone had fully entered the space. He did not acknowledge her entrance. He did not look up. He answered a question Simone asked about the updated route waypoints with a single syllable, "Fine," and turned away. Elena watched it happen in real time. The man who had been charm itself for 30 seconds became a wall in two. She had seen versions of this behavior before in break rooms and hotel bars and the slow hours of long flights, but she had never seen it this close, this clearly, this undeniable. She left the cockpit. She found Tomas in the rear galley. "How much do you have?" she said. He showed her. 11 seconds of clean audio from day 4. Background noise from the crew room. Dave Pruitt's voice, the words distinct enough. "Send a copy to yourself," Elena said. "Not through the company server. Personal email. Password protected." Tomas did it while she was still standing there. "And keep recording," she said. It was the 7th night. Simone was in her hotel room in Charlotte. The notebook was open on the bed beside her. She was not writing. She was reading backward from the earliest pages, the ones with the oldest ink. The handwriting was slightly different from how she wrote now. Younger. The letters more careful, as if the writer was still deciding whether the act of writing things down was going to matter. She turned pages and read and was quiet for a long time. She had been the only black woman in her cohort of 12 at Tuskegee. This was not unusual for aviation programs in those years, and she had not come expecting to find a room that looked like her. She had come to learn to fly. Her primary instructor was a man named Gerald Whitfield, 62 years old, retired Air Force, a pilot with so many hours logged that he had stopped counting them, the way people stop counting after a certain number becomes simply a lot. He was quiet and precise, and on the first day of ground school, he had told the cohort something that Simone had written in the front cover of her very first notebook. "You are here to learn to fly. The aircraft does not care who you are. Keep that distinction clear in your mind." He had pulled her aside after that first class and added something to that. Just for her. "You will need to be twice as prepared as the best person in this room, not because you're twice as good, because you'll have to prove it twice. I'm sorry, that's the truth. It's still the truth." She had not fully believed him until the morning of her first solo flight. She had taxied out to the runway in the Cessna 172 run through her checklist and called the tower for takeoff clearance. The tower controller, a different voice from her usual frequency, someone she didn't recognize, had replied with the clearance, and then a second voice had come through lower, not on the official frequency, but audible in the background of the first transmission. "You sure you want to clear that one? Is she even certified?" The tower controller had answered without hesitation, clearance confirmed. "She's good to go." Simone had sat at the hold line for 3 seconds. Her hands were on the controls. Her feet were on the rudder pedals. Outside, the Georgia morning was turning from gray to gold. She released the brakes. She pushed the throttle forward. The Cessna accelerated down the runway with the specific joy of a small aircraft discovering speed, and she lifted off into an air that did not care who she was, which was exactly what she needed. She flew the full pattern. She landed. She taxied back and shut down the engine and sat in the aircraft for a while after the propeller stopped. Then she went inside, found the university bookstore, and bought a spiral-bound notebook. She sat down at a table in the student union and opened to the first page and wrote what had happened. The date, the time, the words she had heard, the words the controller had said back, what she had done next. Her father had taught her that. Kweku Adeyemi, structural engineer, a man who had built his career on the principle that everything important should be documented because documented things have weight, and weight changes outcomes. Write it down, he had said when she was small and had come home with a story about something that had happened at school. The notebook doesn't lie and it doesn't forget. That spiral-bound notebook from the university store was the first one. The brown leather notebook with the gold initials was the 14th. The first year of Apex Sky Airlines. 1 leased Embraer. 2 pilots. 3 flight attendants. The Atlanta to Savannah route twice daily, operating on a margin so thin that a delayed departure could shift the quarterly numbers. Simone had gone to the Regional Airport Authority meeting to request a second route slot, Atlanta to Nashville, 3 times weekly. She had prepared the presentation for 6 weeks. Market analysis, passenger demand projections, revenue modeling, operational timeline. 40 slides. The research had taken longer than she had at the time admitted to anyone. The committee was 8 people. She was the only woman in the room. She was the only black person. This was again not unusual, and she had not arrived expecting a room that looked like her. She had arrived expecting to be listened to. She presented for 22 minutes. She fielded 3 questions, 2 about fuel cost projections and 1 about crew scheduling. She answered them. She felt in the moment that it had gone well. The data was solid. The argument was clean. When she finished, the committee chairman, Harold Pierce, 64 years old, a man who had been running airport authority meetings since before Simone had her first pilot's certificate, looked at the table in front of him for a moment. Then he looked past her at the general space behind her and said, "Does your financial backer have a representative who can follow up with our office?" Simone had looked at him for 1 full second. "I am the financial backer," she said. He smiled. It was the smile of a man deciding whether to take something seriously and not yet having decided. "Of course," he said. "We'll be in touch." The slot request was approved 6 weeks later. She had believed when the approval came through that they had expected her to disappear before it did. She was still here. On the drive home that night, she had opened the notebook on her knee in the back of a cab and written, "They will always look for the person behind me. There is no one behind me. Write that down." That line had become the unofficial founding principle of how she ran the company. Every hire documented, every promotion documented, no decisions made in hallways or over golf. Everything in writing, everything on record. She had built Apex Sky to be the airline she had wished existed when she was flying for other people. Her name was Renata Okafor. She had been a first officer at Apex Sky for 11 months when a senior captain, a man named Theodore Goss, since retired, had filed 3 formal performance complaints against her in a single quarter. Simone had read those complaints carefully. They were precise. They used the right language. They referenced specific incidents and cited specific dates. They looked from the outside like legitimate documentation of legitimate performance concerns. But Renata had 340 hours on the 737 with no prior complaints. Her check ride scores were strong. Her crew reviews were positive. The 3 complaints had appeared not after any documented incident, but after Renata had raised a question in a crew briefing about a checklist item that Goss had skipped. The complaints had gone through standard HR process. A review was conducted. Renata had been offered a transfer to a different route framed as a resolution. She had accepted. 8 months after the transfer, she had resigned. Her resignation letter was professional and said nothing about why she was leaving. 2 years later, Simone had run into a mutual contact at an aviation conference in Houston. The contact had mentioned Renata in passing. Whatever happened to her, she's flying cargo in Memphis now, overnight, single pilot on a turboprop. Simone had sat with that information for a long time. She had thought about the 11 months Renata had given the airline, the check ride scores, the crew reviews, the 1 question she had asked in a briefing that a man had decided was too much. She had thought about what it cost a career to be transferred once, and what it cost a person to leave the kind of airline they had worked to reach for a cargo run alone in the dark over Tennessee. She had opened the brown leather notebook, the one she was still carrying, and written Renata Okafor's name on the inside front cover, not as a reminder, as a debt. Simone closed the notebook. She set it on the nightstand. She turned off the lamp. In the dark, she looked at the ceiling and thought about Roy Dalton's white knuckles on the yoke during the turbulence. She thought about the way his face had arranged itself when she entered rooms, the practiced blankness that was its own form of statement. She thought about Renata Okafor flying cargo alone at 2 a.m. over Memphis. She thought about the names she hadn't written yet. One more week, she told herself. She closed her eyes. Simone saw the notification before she finished her first coffee. She was in the hotel lobby 6:12 a.m., waiting for the crew van phone in her left hand. The alert came through the Apex Sky Crew Management System. She opened it and read, "Formal complaint filed. Captain Roy Dalton, employee ID 8814, First Officer Simone Adeyemi. Grounds insufficient cockpit resource management skills and inability to meet communication standards required for safe flight operations." 3 pages. Roy had written 3 pages. She read them once quickly. Then she read them again slowly, the way you read something when you want to understand not just what it says, but what it is intended to do. The complaint was professional. Every sentence was in the right register, citing the right frameworks, using the right terminology. It referenced specific flights and specific legs. It described her in controlled language as a pilot whose performance created safety concerns and whose communication style was incompatible with effective cockpit teamwork. There was not a single concrete example, not one incident with verifiable details, not one timestamp, not one witness named, not one specific checklist item or radio call or instrument reading cited. 3 pages of professional language with no load-bearing evidence inside any of it. He had sent it to the chief pilot's office, the training department, and crew scheduling. 3 departments. The distribution list of a man not trying to solve a problem, but trying to build a wall of paper around one. Make it official enough, distribute it widely enough, and the burden of proof shifts onto the person being accused. Simone photographed all 3 pages with her personal phone, the phone with the email domain that did not match any Apex Sky employee system. She capped her pen. She went to the gate. In the crew room before the afternoon departure, Dave Pruitt was talking. He was always talking in the crew room. The specific brand of talking that fills a room without being about anything the social static of a man who was most comfortable when he was loudest. He said something about co-pilots who couldn't handle real flying and should stick to the simulator environment where the consequences were theoretical. He didn't say Simone's name. He didn't look in her direction. He was addressing Craig, and the comment was casual, and 3 crew members at the adjacent table laughed in the way people laugh at things they find mildly amusing, but would not repeat in writing. Thomas Rivera was in the corner. His phone was in his left breast pocket. His thumb was on the record button. He got 11 seconds of clean audio before someone pushed back a chair and the ambient noise shifted and the moment closed. He stopped recording. He put his phone back in his pocket. He kept the file. The Jacksonville flight carried a passenger in seat 4A who would matter later without knowing it yet. Margaret Osei was 67 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Decatur, Georgia, who wore a yellow cardigan and had 2 carry-on bags because she refused to check luggage on principle. During boarding, she was struggling with the overhead bin. Wrong angle, wrong leverage. When Simone passed through the cabin on the walk-around, Simone stopped. She took the larger bag from Margaret's hands, lifted it cleanly into the bin, repositioned the smaller one to make room, and secured the latch. The whole exchange took 12 seconds. Margaret looked at her with the direct warmth of a woman who had been a schoolteacher long enough to have no patience for indirectness. "Thank you, sweetheart," of course Simone said. "You're the co-pilot." "Yes, ma'am." Margaret looked at her for a moment. "Good," she said. "I feel better already." In the seat next to her, 4B, Carl Hutchins had his laptop open and his earbuds in. He was 55, a businessman from Atlanta, the kind of frequent flyer who treated aircraft as mobile offices. He had not looked up during the bag exchange, but something in the exchange, some quality of movement, some tone in the brief conversation, had snagged his attention in the peripheral way that things do when they don't match your existing model of the world. He glanced up. Simone was already moving back toward the cockpit. He watched her for 3 seconds, decided he couldn't name what he had noticed, and went back to his laptop. Between the morning and afternoon departures on day 6, Roy pulled Elena aside in the gate area. He was in his warm register. First name, easy smile, the version of himself that earned good crew reviews. He said he had noticed that some of the cabin crew seemed to be spending more time than usual in conversation with the new first officer. That this was, of course, fine. Crew cohesion was important. But that for a junior crew member on their first assignment, a certain degree of professional distance from the flight deck personnel was generally appropriate. He said this the way you say things when you want them to land without appearing to throw them. Not a threat. A suggestion wrapped in concern. Elena nodded. She smiled. She said she understood. That evening she found Tomas. "How much do you have total?" she said. He walked her through it. The 11 seconds of audio, screenshots of 3 text messages Craig had sent to Roy on the crew management app, messages she had been able to see because Tomas had been behind Craig in the break room when the notification preview appeared on Craig's unlocked phone. The messages were brief and individually deniable. Together with the audio and the briefing incident and the radio overrides, they described something that had edges. "Send copies to yourself," Elena said. "Personal email. Tonight. Password protect the folder." Thomas already had. He showed her the confirmation. She nodded once. "Good," she said. The morning of the 7th day, Simone sat in her hotel room in Charlotte, with the notebook open on the bed in front of her and read through every entry she had made. From the first line, 5:49 a.m., first contact, verbal removal attempt, 11 witnesses, 0 responses, to the most recent, 14 days of careful documentation. Every radio override, every briefing exclusion, every directed coffee fetch, every comment made loud enough to hear and quiet enough to deny. The pattern was complete. She could see it the way you see the shape of a coastline from altitude. Each individual point of land ambiguous on its own, but from above unmistakable. She picked up her pen. She wrote one final entry for the week. Pattern confirmed. Not a personality conflict. A structure, built over time, sustained by the silence of people who knew better and chose smaller. He believes this airline belongs to the culture he has always operated inside. He is about to find out whose it is. She closed the notebook. She set it on the bed. She looked out the window at the Charlotte morning. She thought about Renata Okafor's name on the inside front cover. She thought about 4 anonymous complaints filed by people who had trusted that filing them would matter. She thought about Elena Vasquez's voice in the jet bridge 7 days ago. "You doing okay?" And the particular texture of that question, which was the question of someone who had seen something and wasn't sure yet what to do about it. Simone got dressed. She picked up the notebook. She went to the airport. The last flight of week 2 was Apex Sky 4061, Atlanta to Denver. A 3-hour, 14-minute run with clear skies over Georgia and a forecast that showed nothing complicated until well past the Mississippi River. Roy ran his usual solo act on the pre-flight checklist. Simone noted 3 items. She noted the time of each. She turned to the correct page in the quick reference handbook and set it on her knee. At cruise altitude, 35,000 feet over eastern Tennessee, an amber warning light appeared on the hydraulic systems panel. But before any of that, before we go any further, I need to stop and ask you something directly. If you had been Elena Vasquez watching this happen for 7 days, watching a qualified pilot be erased from her own cockpit, one small act at a time, watching 11 crew members stay silent, watching a man file a false complaint and face no consequence, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up sooner? Would you have stayed quiet to protect your job? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Gathered the evidence, said nothing, and waited. Leave your answer below. Because what happens next in this cockpit, nobody saw coming. The hydraulic pressure warning on a 737 is amber for a reason. Amber does not mean emergency. Amber means pay attention. It is the aircraft's way of saying something is changing and you should know about it before it finishes changing. The checklist for an amber hydraulic warning is specific and non-optional. It calls for the crew to confirm the reading cross-reference related systems and run the hydraulic abnormal procedure. Not because the amber light means the aircraft is in danger, but because the aircraft is always telling you something, and the pilots who last the longest are the ones who listen before they have to. Roy tapped the gauge. The needle held. "Sensor glitch," he said. It was the most words he had spoken to Simone in 40 minutes, which made it by the standards of this flight a conversation. "I've seen this 100 times on the 737. It'll clear." Simone looked at the gauge. She did not tap it. She cross-referenced 3 related instruments in 2 seconds. The kind of scan pattern that is built over thousands of hours and cannot be hurried. The hydraulic system B pressure gauge, the standby hydraulic quantity indicator, the flight control surface position readout. "System A is reading 4,100 psi, she said. Her voice was the same temperature it had been during the briefing, during the coffee request, during 3 days of erasure. "Normal cruise pressure is 3,000. We should run the hydraulic abnormal checklist." I said it's a glitch. His voice had an edge. The edge of 21 years of being in charge. The edge of a man who had been trying to remove this woman from his aircraft for 2 weeks and found her still there, still calm, still pointing at instruments he preferred to ignore. "Captain, I heard you the first time." Simone reached for the quick reference handbook. She opened it to the correct page. She set it on her knee and kept watching the gauge. 12 minutes later, the amber light went red. The master caution horn sounded. 2 sharp pulses that cut through the cockpit, the way a fire alarm cuts through a building, sudden, physical, impossible to pretend you did not hear. Simultaneously, the flight controls stiffened under Roy's hands. Not locked, not yet, but heavy. As if the aircraft had gained 1,000 pounds in the space of a single breath, as if the yoke were now connected to something much larger than it had been a moment before. "System A failure," Simone said. Flat. Controlled. The frequency of a voice that has been in this type of situation before and has learned that panic costs time that cannot be returned. Running the hydraulic loss checklist. She had the quick reference handbook open to the correct page before Roy could respond. Her fingers had found it without searching the way fingers find familiar things in the dark. She read clearly and deliberately. Step 1. Confirm system. A pump switches off. She reached for the overhead panel. Step 2. Check System B pressure and quantity. She looked at the gauge. Normal range, holding steady but alone now. System B was the backup. System B was currently the only thread. Step 3. Assess flight control availability and prepare for possible manual reversion. Roy's hands were on the yoke. Both of them. His knuckles had gone white. The same white Elena had noticed during the mountain turbulence, but different now. Turbulence was outside the aircraft. System failures were inside it. Turbulence passed. This would stay until they dealt with it. "I've got the aircraft," Roy said. His voice still had authority in it, but the authority was stretched, like a rope that has been holding weight for too long. "You have the aircraft," Simone confirmed. She keyed the radio. "Denver Center, Apex Sky, 4061 declaring an emergency. We have a hydraulic system A failure. Requesting priority handling and vectors for Denver International." The controller's response came back within 4 seconds. "Apex Sky 4061, emergency acknowledged. Turn right, heading 270. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Denver runway 34 left will be available. Emergency equipment is standing by." Roy heard the words, emergency equipment, and his breathing shifted. Faster, shallower, the breathing of a man approaching the edge of what he had prepared for. "We can make Denver on schedule," he said. "System B is holding. We don't need to change anything." "Captain." Simone's voice had not changed pitch. Not once in this conversation. "We need to descend now. If we lose System B redundancy at this altitude, our ability to control the aircraft becomes seriously limited. The checklist is clear. We descend and prepare." "I know what the checklist says. Then we descend." 2 words. No argument inside them, no pleading, no challenge, no emotion of any kind. Just the clean, irrefutable weight of someone who knows the correct answer and is not going to pretend otherwise because the alternative is too expensive. Roy stared at the instruments. The System B pressure gauge stared back at him, steady but completely alone, the single remaining thread between 35,000 feet and the ground below it. He thought about the word alone in a way he had not thought about words during a flight in a long time. He descended. In the galley, Elena felt the aircraft begin its descent and understood that it was not a scheduled descent. She had been on enough flights to know the difference between the gradual, comfortable angle of a planned descent and the crisper, more purposeful nose-down attitude of an aircraft responding to something that required response. She checked the flight information screen in the galley. 3 hours ahead of schedule, not a planned descent. She picked up the intercom and called the cockpit. Simone answered, "Not Roy. We have a hydraulic issue," Simone said. "Non-critical at this moment. We're descending for precautionary reasons. I need you to prepare the cabin for a possible priority landing. Use the word precautionary. Keep your voice at exactly the register it is right now." "Copy," Elena said. She was terrified. She kept her voice at exactly the register it was right now. She moved through the cabin with the deliberate calm of a person who understands that their face is the information passengers are reading. She collected loose items. She confirmed tray tables. She spoke to passengers who were beginning to look at her with the particular alertness of people who sense something they haven't been told yet. She smiled. She answered questions. She let her voice carry the message that everything was being handled without using those words, because those words in her experience accomplished the opposite of what they intended. In seat 4, a Margaret Osei gripped her armrests with both hands and looked out the window. In 4B, Carl Hutchins closed his laptop. The spreadsheet he had been reviewing was, in this moment, completely unimportant to him. At 12,000 feet, System B pressure dipped. Not a failure. A fluctuation. A 3-second drop in pressure that recovered on its own. 3 seconds. In a moment like that inside a cockpit, 3 seconds is not a short time. 3 seconds is long enough for the flight controls to feel like wet rope. Long enough for the aircraft to communicate with total honesty that its margin was very thin and getting thinner. Roy froze. His hands were on the yoke, both of them, but they had stopped moving. His eyes locked on the pressure gauge, the way a person's eyes lock on a thing they are afraid to look away from. His breathing was audible in the cockpit. Quick, shallow, wrong. "I have the aircraft." Simone did not ask. She did not request. She stated it the way the ground states its position to a falling object, simply factually, without any consideration of whether the falling object has a preference about the matter. Roy's fingers uncurled from the yoke, one at a time, slowly as if each finger was releasing a separate argument it had been holding on to. Simone took the controls. Her hands settled onto the yoke and the throttles with the ease of someone returning to something they know completely. Her scan pattern was immediate and methodical. Airspeed, altitude, heading, hydraulic pressure repeat. She adjusted the throttles with small, precise inputs. She called Denver approach on the radio and updated them on the aircraft's status. Her voice was the same voice she had been using all along. Not urgent, not casual, exactly authoritative, the voice of someone for whom this was not the worst situation they had ever navigated. The aircraft did what she told it. Machines respond to precision the way people respond to certainty. They steady themselves, they align, they find the path that has been asked of them. In the back, Carl Hutchins was no longer pretending to work. He had his hand flat on the armrest, and he was watching Elena move through the cabin and reading her face with the focus of a man whose usual tools, money, contacts, the ability to solve problems with a phone call, were completely unavailable to him. What he saw in Elena's face was, this is being handled by someone who knows what they are doing. He did not know yet who that someone was, but it was not he noticed the person he would have expected. The runway appeared through the windshield at 800 feet. 3-4 left. 10,000 feet of concrete laid out ahead of them, the runway lights defining the edges with the absolute clarity of things that matter. On both sides of the runway, fire trucks, red and white positioned waiting. The kind of welcome that no one wanted to need. Simone brought the 737 down the glide slope with whatever hydraulic authority remained. The controls were sluggish, not unmanageable, but asking for more input than normal, requiring constant small adjustments that would be invisible to anyone watching from outside, but that demanded complete continuous attention from the pilot making them. This was not the technique of a pilot who had practiced emergency landings once a year in a simulator. This was the technique of a pilot who had internalized the aircraft so completely that she could feel what it needed before the instruments confirmed it. Main gear touched first, firm controlled. A definite landing, not a tentative one. The nose came down a half-second later. Spoilers deployed. Reverse thrust engaged. The aircraft decelerated straight and centered down 3-4 left, and the runway did not end before they had stopped, and the fire trucks remained where they were, because they were not needed, and the 172 passengers on board Apex Sky 4061 were all breathing. In the cabin, someone started clapping. One person somewhere in the middle of the aircraft, then the person next to them, then more spreading backward and forward like something that had been held in and needed to go somewhere. Then all of them. Roy Dalton sat in the left seat with his hands in his lap. His face was the color of paper that has been left in the rain. For the first time in 21 years, he had nothing to say. Not because he had chosen silence. Because silence was the only thing left. Simone coordinated with ground operations, the airport authority, and the maintenance team with the same precise efficiency she had brought to every radio call, every checklist, every moment over the past 14 days. She filled out the emergency declaration paperwork at the gate. She briefed the maintenance crew on exactly what she had observed in the hydraulic system readings, starting from the amber warning light and through the System B fluctuation at 12,000 feet. She was thorough and specific, and she did not rush. Roy handled none of it. Elena found Simone in the jet bridge after the last passenger had deplaned. The jet bridge was empty. Just the two of them, the hum of the airport ventilation, the last of the afternoon light angled through the windows at the far end. "That was you," Elena said, not a question. Simone looked at her. "Everyone did their job today." Elena shook her head. "No, that was you. From the beginning, all of it. That was you." A pause. Simone looked at Elena for a moment in the way she had looked at the hydraulic gauge, steady reading more than the surface. "Keep Tomas's recordings safe," she said. Elena blinked. She nodded once. She didn't ask how Simone knew about the recordings. Roy called Craig from the gate area, while passengers were still retrieving bags at the carousel. His hands were not steady. He was rebuilding the story in real time, the way he always rebuilt stories, starting with what he needed to be true and working backward to the words that would make it sound that way. "Textbook emergency handling," he said. "I had it under control throughout. The Copilot was in a supporting role standard procedure." Craig said sure in the voice of a man who was beginning to have a different kind of thought, but was not ready to say it out loud. Across the gate waiting area, Carl Hutchins was on his phone. He was describing what he had witnessed to a colleague in Atlanta. Not the emergency itself, which he had experienced as a passenger and could not fully see, but something else. The Copilot, he said. Something about her. He had been watching her through the whole flight, he realized now without consciously deciding to. There was something about the way she moved through the aircraft, the way she spoke to the flight attendant, the way she came down that jet bridge after they landed. Not relieved, not shaken, not performing composure, just composed. He couldn't explain it better than that. He just knew that the person in the right seat had not been what he expected, and he didn't fully understand yet what he had actually been watching. He submitted a written account to the Apex Sky customer relations inbox before his cab reached the hotel. He did not know her name when he wrote it. He would find out in 3 days. Conference room C7. Denver International Airport. Gray carpet. Recycled air. Institutional coffee in a carafe that no one had touched. A long table with 8 chairs and a speakerphone that looked like it hadn't been used since the previous decade. Roy arrived 4 minutes early. He had straightened his jacket in the elevator mirror. He had retightened his tie. He had rehearsed the essential elements of the narrative: hydraulic emergency, decisive captain, precautionary landing. No incident's crew performed per protocol. He had the sentences ready. He was in his own estimation about to walk into the kind of meeting that ended with a handshake and a note in his file marked exemplary performance under pressure. He sat at the far end of the table, the captain's position, and folded his hands on the surface in front of him and waited. The door opened at 4:17 p.m. 4 people entered. 3 men, 1 woman, dark suits. Company IDs clipped at the breast pocket. Roy recognized 2 of them. Marcus Webb, VP of Operations, a man Roy had met at 3 company events and considered an ally by proximity, and Patricia Nolan, Director of Human Resources, who Roy had always regarded as a formality. The other 2 were unfamiliar. Legal. Legal always looked the same, pressed expressionless, carrying folders thick enough to do structural damage if dropped. Roy stood, extended his hand to Marcus. "Hell of an afternoon. Happy to walk you through everything that happened up there." Marcus shook his hand briefly. The handshake that ends conversations rather than beginning them. "Have a seat, Captain Dalton." The "have a seat" landed wrong. Roy heard it. The tone was off. Too flat, too careful, the register of someone who has rehearsed what comes after it. He sat down. Marcus remained standing. He looked at the door. Everyone in the room looked at the door. Simone Adeyemi walked in, and she was not the Simone that Roy Dalton had spent 14 days trying to erase. She was wearing a charcoal suit, fitted tailored the kind of fabric that does not wrinkle on a cross-country flight, because the person who made it understood that certain people wear their clothes to rooms where things are decided. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders. No Copilot wings on her chest. No Apex Sky Crew lanyard around her neck. One piece of jewelry, the gold pendant now outside her collar, resting against the open button of her shirt. Not hidden. Visible. The Apex Sky Founders logo in gold, the kind that appeared on the original company charter and the SEC filing and absolutely nowhere else. Roy stared at her. His brain was receiving the image and could not assign it meaning, the recognition of someone familiar in a context that makes familiarity impossible to process. Like a word you know perfectly well suddenly refusing to mean anything. Marcus Webb cleared his throat. "Captain Dalton, I'd like to formally introduce Simone Adeyemi." The pause that followed was exactly as long as it needed to be, and not 1 second shorter. Founder majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board of Apex Sky Airlines. The room did not move. The air in the room did not move. Roy's face ran through 4 expressions in the space of 5 seconds. Confusion first, then denial, then something that was not quite recognition but was close to it, and then below all of those spreading upward from somewhere beneath his composure a cold and comprehensive understanding. The ground he had been standing on for 14 days had never been ground at all. It had been held in place by something he had not known about, and now he knew, and the knowing felt like falling. "That's..." Roy's mouth was working. His voice was not cooperating. "That's not possible. She had credentials. She had a file." "She has 14,200 flight hours," Marcus said. The number landed in the room with the weight of its actual size. Type-rated on 5 separate aircraft families, 8 years of military service. Former chief pilot at Apex Sky before transitioning to the ownership role 7 years ago. Every credential in that personnel file is real, Captain. Every single one. Roy turned to look at Simone. She was standing at the opposite end of the table, hands at her sides, watching him the way a person watches something that is doing exactly what they expected, and they are simply waiting for it to finish. Patient, clinical, not angry. Something further past anger than anger, something that had been waiting 14 days for this room. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the leather notebook. The room went quiet in a way that silence doesn't usually manage. Not the absence of sound, but the fullness of attention. Every person in the room pointed in the same direction. She opened to the first page. Day 1, she read. 5:49 a.m. pre-flight checklist. Items 7, 11, and 14. Copilot verbal confirmation not requested. CRM non-compliance. She turned the page. Day 1, 6:03 a.m. Radio transmission overridden during taxi. Deliberate. A page. Day 2. Pre-departure briefing conducted without Copilot notification. 6 crew members present as witnesses. No objections raised. A page. Day 3. In-flight commentary regarding Copilot qualifications made in Copilot's presence. Volume deliberate. Witnesses 1 check, airman, 2 crew members. A page. Day 4. Formal complaint filed. 3 pages. Distributed to 3 department heads. No supporting evidence attached. No specific incidents cited. No timestamps. No witnesses named. She paused. She closed the notebook. She held it up so Roy could see the cover. Brown leather worn soft at the spine. The initials S.A. pressed into the front in small gold letters. 14 days, she said, 63 entries. Roy was looking at the notebook the way people look at things that have been watching them without their knowledge. And this, Simone said. She reached into her jacket pocket and drew out her personal phone. She placed it on the table and pressed play. Roy's own voice filled the room. Sharp, clear, unmistakable. The specific quality of a voice that knows it is in front of an audience and is performing for it. Get out of my cockpit. I don't fly with your kind. 9 seconds. Then silence. Roy's jaw worked. No sound came out. He looked at Marcus, at Patricia, at the 2 legal officers, whose names he still did not know. Every face around the table held the same expression, the carefully maintained neutrality of people who have already reached their conclusion and are waiting for the formalities to conclude. I didn't know, Roy said. His voice was thin in a way it had not been at any point in 14 days. I didn't know who you were. Simone tilted her head very slightly. Didn't know what, Captain? The question sat in the room. That I was the owner, or that what you were doing was wrong. She let the question stay where she had put it. She did not fill the silence. She had spent 14 days letting silence do the work that speech would have wasted, and she let it do that work now, absorbing everything Roy Dalton had said and done over the past 2 weeks, absorbing the formal complaint and the coffee request, and the 11 witnesses who said nothing, and the 2 men who had built walls alongside him, absorbing all of it and reflecting it back. Because if the answer is that you only regret it because of who I turned out to be, Simone said quietly, then you've just told everyone in this room exactly who you are. Roy's hands were flat on the table, his fingers pressed into the surface as if looking for something solid. There was nothing solid left. And here is what I want you to understand, she continued. Her voice had not changed volume or pitch once in this room, just as it had not changed on the radio during the emergency, just as it had not changed in the briefing room on day 1. I did not come into your cockpit to catch you. I came because 4 people trusted that filing a complaint in this company would matter. I came because I needed to know whether I had built something worth trusting, and I found out. The room was very still. What I found was exactly what they told me I would find. Patricia Nolan opened her folder. The pages inside were color-tabbed. Yellow flags for documentation, red for action. This investigation had started the moment Simone filed her undercover assignment paperwork 3 months ago. The meeting was not the beginning. It was the closing argument. James Ortega read from his legal summary. The formal findings met the threshold for immediate action under the Employee Conduct Agreement, Section 9C. The union had been notified. Roy would have access to the grievance process. The formal notification would arrive in his inbox within the hour. Roy started to speak. Union process 21 years, this wasn't the right way to handle a personnel dispute. And James Ortega opened to the tabbed page in his folder and set it flat on the table without raising his voice. The grievance timeline was outlined. The evidence summary was attached. The audio recording had been logged and preserved. Roy looked at the page for a moment and stopped speaking. Craig Mercer and Dave Pruitt Simone said to Patricia, Mandatory Corrective Action Program, 12 weeks minimum, behavioral monitoring, scheduling eligibility suspended during the program period. If the program is not completed, the outcome defaults to termination. Patricia wrote it down. And the 4 original complaints, Simone continued. The people who filed them. I want their names on my desk by end of business Friday. Not to involve them in this process. To thank them. Simone placed the leather notebook on the table. She placed her personal phone beside it. Evidence and testimony side by side on the gray tabletop, quiet as things that have already done their work and no longer need to announce themselves. She left both of them. She would not need them in this form anymore. She turned to Marcus. Proceed with the full review. I wanted to go back 18 months. Every complaint filed on this route during that period. Every one. Understood, Marcus said. She walked to the door. Her steps on the gray carpet were steady and measured. The same rhythm she had carried into every cockpit, every briefing room, every gate area walk for 14 days. She did not look at Roy Dalton again. She did not need to. She had gotten what she came for, and it was not what was in this room. It was what was in the notebook she had left on the table. The door closed behind her. Roy sat at the end of the table, surrounded by folders and suits and the specific silence of a room in which everything important has already been said. He understood sitting there that the woman he had refused to fly with had been flying the entire airline. And he understood something else, too. Something that would take him a longer time to fully reckon with. She had come into his cockpit not to prove anything about herself, but to find out the truth about what she had built. And the truth had been him. The suspension letter arrived in Roy Dalton's inbox at 8:04 p.m. He was in his hotel room at the Denver Airport Marriott, sitting on the edge of the bed in yesterday's shirt. The room was the standard kind. Functional, impersonal, the room of a man whose life had become portable. He read the letter on his phone. 3 paragraphs. Official Apex Sky letterhead. The language was clean and direct, pending formal investigation, immediate removal from flight operations, surrender of company-issued credentials within 24 hours. 21 years. 3 paragraphs. He read it twice. Then he set the phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the wall for a long time. Not at anything on the wall. At whatever was behind his own eyes that he could no longer avoid looking at now that everything else had been taken away. He thought about the pre-flight checklist. Items 7-11-14. He thought about the radio call he had overridden during taxi. He thought about the briefing he had run without her. He thought about 3 pages of formal complaint with no evidence inside any of them, and the morning he had filed it, how certain he had been, how completely certain. He did not sleep that night. Craig Mercer's notice arrived at 8:04 a.m. the following morning. Dave Pruitt's at 8:06. Different from Roy's. Not termination. Not yet. Mandatory corrective action program. 12 weeks anti-bias training, behavioral monitoring, documented performance reviews with results tied to when they could fly again. The letter was specific and clear about what happened if they didn't complete it. Craig called Dave. Dave didn't answer. Neither of them called Roy. When the center of a structure collapses, the things that were arranged around it stop holding their positions. Craig sat at his kitchen table in Atlanta and read the letter 3 times. The 3rd time through, he noticed a sentence he had passed over. The first 2. The findings reflect conduct that, while not rising to the level of immediate termination, represents a sustained pattern of behavior that created a hostile environment for a colleague and will be treated accordingly. He put the letter down. He did not pick it up again. But he thought about it for the rest of the day and the day after and the day after that. 3 days after the Denver landing, Simone called Elena personally. Elena was in her kitchen in Atlanta, still in the clothes she had worn to the airport that morning. She had been half expecting some kind of communication from the company. A formal acknowledgement, a process update, something institutional. She had not been expecting the call to come from the number it came from. Elena. Simone's voice on the phone had exactly the same quality it had in the cockpit. Steady, clear, slightly warmer than the situation technically required. What you did over those 14 days, and what you didn't do, didn't go unnoticed. You were the only crew member who showed basic human decency from the beginning. I want to offer you the role of lead cabin crew supervisor for the Atlanta hub. Elena sat down. She was already sitting, but she sat more fully. 5 seconds of silence. Then I should have said something sooner. You said something when it mattered most, Simone replied. That's enough. And now you'll be in a position to make sure the next person doesn't have to wait as long. Elena accepted. She hung up the phone. She sat in her kitchen and cried. Not the kind of crying that comes from sadness, but the kind that comes from having held something heavy for a long time and having someone tell you it's all right to put it down now. Denise Cole called Tomas Rivera the following morning. His voice recordings had been formally entered into the investigative record. His initiative in documenting what he observed had been noted at the executive level. A commendation would be added to his personnel file. There was also a position available at the Atlanta hub if he wanted it. A transfer that had been created specifically because his conduct had demonstrated the kind of judgment the hub needed more of. Thomas listened to all of this in his apartment in Jacksonville, standing by the window. When Denise finished, he asked one question. Is she okay? A pause. She's exactly who she's always been, Denise said. Thomas nodded to himself. Tell her I'm glad she did it, he said. He accepted the transfer. Margaret Osei read a brief account in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution 4 days after the flight. Factual, no names. She read it twice, then called her daughter and read it to her over the phone. That was the Copilot on my flight to Jacksonville, she said. I knew it from the moment she lifted my bag. I told you when I landed. I said that woman is something. Didn't I say that her daughter said yes, she had said that? Carl Hutchins submitted a written account to Apex Sky's Customer Relations Office describing what he had observed. The co-pilot's coordination during the emergency, her composure, the quality of her presence in the aircraft. He submitted it before he knew her name. When he found out 3 days later who she was, he did not submit a follow-up. He didn't need to. The account said what it said, and it said it without knowing which was the only version of the account that mattered. Simone's company-wide memo went out on a Thursday morning under the heading of the Office of the Chairwoman. It was 3 pages. Her signature at the bottom. The same clean, precise strokes that had filled 63 entries in a leather notebook over 14 days. The memo announced a restructuring of workplace culture policies effective immediately. An independent, anonymous reporting system routed outside internal management chains administered by a third-party firm with direct board access. Mandatory crew resource management and anti-bias training twice yearly, with completion tied to scheduling eligibility, not as a suggestion, but as a condition. A new diversity oversight committee seated by employee election from each department with real hiring input. And a mentorship program pairing senior captains with incoming pilots from underrepresented backgrounds. Voluntary but built and sponsored by the person who had just walked through 14 days of proof of why it mattered. The memo ended with one sentence. Every person who boards one of our aircraft deserves to know that the people in the cockpit were chosen because they were the best. And that the word best means exactly that, nothing more and nothing less. Roy Dalton cleaned out his locker at the Atlanta crew base on a Thursday afternoon. He had timed it for 2:30 when most crews were either airborne or in briefings. He did not want witnesses. He had had enough of those. The locker was standard issue. Gray metal combination lock that he had used so many times his fingers remembered the numbers without instruction. Inside a spare uniform shirt, a headset case, 2 granola bars he had forgotten were there, and a laminated photo of himself standing next to a 737 on the day he made captain. He was younger in the photo, smiling the smile of a man who believes the world is arranged in the correct order and always will be. He put everything in a cardboard box. 21 years fit inside it with room to spare, which was its own kind of answer. On his way to the parking lot, he passed the crew bulletin board. A new flyer was pinned at eye level. The mentorship program announcement. At the top, a photograph, Simone Adeyemi in a captain's uniform standing on the tarmac with a 737 behind her arms crossed, looking directly into the camera. Roy stopped walking. He stood in front of the bulletin board for a long moment. He could not look at the photograph, and he could not look away from it. Then he walked past, and the box under his arm felt heavier than its contents explained. 3 carrier applications followed in the next 2 months. 3 rejections. The aviation industry is smaller than it appears from the outside, and certain records travel through it faster than weather systems. Roy Dalton found himself on the ground not because he lacked the skill to fly, but because too many doors had seen the same file and closed. The sky had quietly changed the locks, and it had not done so with any particular malice. It had simply done what systems do when they are finally made to work the way they were supposed to. 6 months later, Elena Vasquez stood in the same briefing room where this story began and ran a cabin crew orientation for 4 new flight attendants. She walked them through the anonymous reporting system. She explained the escalation process. She told them what Simone's memo had said, that speaking up was not optional and silence was not neutral. And she said it not as a policy statement, but as someone who had learned the difference between those 2 things the hard way. One of the 4 raised her hand and asked whether anyone had ever actually used the reporting system and had it make a difference. Elena looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Sit down. I'll tell you the story." That same week, a 27-year-old first officer named Destiny Okafor walked into the crew briefing room at Hartsfield-Jackson for her first Apex Sky assignment. The captain, a 12-year veteran named Steve Alderman, looked up from his coffee. "Okafor," he said. "You're with me today." He stood. He extended his hand. "Good to fly with you. Let's go." No second look, no qualifying remark about experience or programs or how things used to be. A handshake and a flight plan and 2 pilots walking to the same aircraft. Destiny shook his hand. Her grip was firm. Behind her eyes was the knowledge that a year ago this moment might have gone differently, and the reason it hadn't was a woman with a leather notebook who had decided, instead of sending a memo or opening an investigation from a distance, to go find out for herself. The leather notebook sits now in a glass display case in the executive lobby of Apex Sky Airlines, Atlanta headquarters. A small brass plaque beneath it reads, "Every voice deserves to be heard. Every cockpit deserves respect." Simone still flies. Once a month she puts herself on the roster as a working first officer on the Atlanta Loop, the same triangle route where all of this began. She flies it because the cockpit is the only place where altitude strips everything down to what actually matters, and she flies it because she wants every crew member who sees her name on the schedule to know that the person who built the airline still remembers what it felt like to sit in the right seat and be invisible. On a Tuesday morning in November, she is in the right seat of a 737 climbing out of Atlanta. The captain is a young black man named Marcus Holt, 3 years into his career, who runs the pre-flight checklist exactly the way it was designed. 2 voices, 1 aircraft, both of them necessary. He calls each item. She confirms. Back and forth. Redundancy through communication. The architecture of safety working the way it was always supposed to work. Outside the windshield, the sky over Atlanta is the color of copper and thin clouds, and the city is falling away beneath them, the way cities do when you are leaving at speed. Simone opens her notebook to a blank page. She uncaps her pen. She writes the date, the flight number, the time. Below that 2 words, all good. She closes the notebook. She looks out at the horizon. Wide, clean lit in the particular way that early mornings earn after everything that comes before them. And for the first time in a long time, there is nothing else she needs to write. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about someone who was told they didn't belong and refused to believe it, drop a comment right now and tell me who you thought of. And if you watched all the way to the end, thank you. That means everything. Please share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss the next story. Because the next one, just like this one, might be exactly what someone out there needs. We will be here, and we will keep telling these stories until every seat belongs to whoever earned it.